Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the live stream. I am going to be doing a video at this point. I'm actually going to be doing several videos to just basically kind of talk about general things about each class and particular builds for those class. As you know, in WildStar, there are 6 classes. Each class has its own role, if you will. Things like, all classes can DPS, but then their secondary build might also be either tanking or healing, depending on the class. First off, let me introduce myself. I am Luke. I am a member of Guild Umbra. Big shout out to those guys, doing a hell of a job. Really excited and super psyched about doing some more WildStar stuff. So here we go. Okay, we are going to talk about in this video specifically the DPS medic. What are the stat priorities? I get a lot of questions in game and both in our guild a lot of times about, well, what stat is the primary stat I should be going with? Or what stat should I be putting more of my focus on a different stat, in other words. So as you can see, we are working with WildStar base, WS base. It's a builder. The game's not live, so I can't really show actual footage. It's a weekday right now. So anyway, let's jump right into it. As the DPS medic, you want tech. Tech is assault power, or that's what it translates to. It's 1 tech equals 0.5 assault power. And you have milestones. Milestones are when you reach a certain amount of a primary stat, it gives you an extra amount of that particular stat. For example, with tech, you get, if I had 450 tech, I get plus 20 assault power. Okay? So, primary stat, without a doubt, as a DPS medic, is tech. If you have pieces of gear that maybe throughout leveling or grouping, even rating, that you might pop up and see, well, hey, this is an increase in tech. Should I take it or not take it? Well, it's a little bit more advanced than that, but for simplistic sake, we will say, well, if it has more tech than what you currently have, of course, take it. Another secondary stat important to a DPS medic is Moxie. Moxie covers crit hit rating and crit severity rating. Well, what is that? Critical hits are obviously harder than normal hits. Critical severity, well, what is that? That is basically when I critical hit. Let's say I hit for 1400 as a critical hit. With more critical severity rating, I will have a little bit harder of a crit, if you will. So instead of hitting for 1400, I'd hit for, 1700 for that particular ability. So that's, you can see where that's pretty doggone important as a DPS medic. Lastly, brutality. Brutality affects strike through rating and crit severity rating. Since we've already talked about crit severity rating briefly, what is strike through? I get that a lot. I even ask that question a lot. How important is it? Strike through rating basically is like when I am casting an ability on an opponent, it is their ability to deflect them. So basically, if I cast discharge is basically your builder, which I'll talk about in another video. Ticks for 3 times. It's a cast over 1.25 seconds, and it hits 3 times. So if I had, say, a level 50 or a level 40 even, with low strike through rating, particularly low strike through rating, um, then I have a pretty good chance that some of those ticks of damage from discharge might be deflected, which is bad. We don't want that as a DPS. We want to be hitting and hitting hard. Um, so I would say early on in the game, it's not as huge a deal, which is why I place it third on the priority list right now. Um, because, well, your amps, for one, will give you some strike through rating. It's like 3% or something like that. Um, but as you progress through the game, strike through becomes a big deal. It becomes a big deal because of something you run into in raids and in groups as well, later on in the game, especially. Um, because bosses have a ton of to deflect. Don't ask me how much. I don't know off the top of my head. But basically, keep in mind that if you don't have enough strike through rating, um, then your abilities are gonna be deflected, and you're not gonna be damaging whatever you're attacking. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we said tech is the first primary, moxie as the second primary, and then brutality. Now you can plug in like grit for more health, because obviously a dead DPS does no damage. Um, so grit would fall in, as I guess, a fourth, closely followed by tech, or excuse me, finesse, which is deflect rating and critical hit deflect rating. Because they're important, but hopefully as DPS you're not tanking mobs too much unless you're just like leveling. Um, so you're not going to put a high priority on deflect rating. Your damage. You're wanting to get through that mob and into the next mobs as quickly as possible. Same thing in dungeons. You want to be burning through things, groups of mobs in dungeons as quickly as possible. And if you're stacking finesse as opposed to tech or moxie or the more important primary stats, then you're not going to be doing as much damage, obviously. Um, so, as a fourth one, I would, if the piece of gear has, a majority of what you're looking for, and it has grit with the piece of gear, by all means, that's just a bonus. So we basically covered the primary stats that we were looking at with the medic, as far as DPS is concerned. They are different for other builds, obviously. Or rather, other roles, not builds. They still place a pretty high importance on those primary stats. But anyway, we're going to talk about secondary stats for a minute. And the reason I run into this is because I had a very nice, weapon, resonator, if you will, the weapon of the medic, that didn't have any primary stats on it whatsoever. But it had secondary stats on them. And the assault power was better than the assault power resonators I had currently equipped. So first impressions of this particular item was, oh, it's going to be crap because it has no primary stats on it. No, not necessarily. Um, because the secondary stats are flat increases, okay, as opposed to increases that are incremental based off points that you get in your primary stats. For example, okay, let's just make it simple. I have a resonator that has 10 tech. Well, what does that equate to in assault power? That equates to 5 assault power. Let's say the other resonator I'm looking at has 20 assault power. 20 is bigger than 10, obviously. So you would take it. So you kind of have to look at secondary stats, and I'm talking about these up here. Assault and support power if it's a weapon. and kind of ask yourself, okay, what do I currently have, and is taking this particular piece of gear going to be an increase for me or not? Even though it doesn't have primary stats on it, that's not the issue. The issue is I want the most bang for my buck from that piece of gear. So, as I said, you kind of need to look through these primary stats and see what each point does. And then, do the math. You know, use a calculator if you got to. And figure out, does the secondary stats that are currently on that piece of gear, are they more than what I would get from what I'm wearing now? And it's an upgrade. If the secondary stats are obviously better than your primary ones. So that's just something I ran into this previous beta weekend. I had, this resonator that had better secondary stats than primary stats that I was currently wearing. And I looked over it, and I almost sold it. Actually, I almost threw it in the guild bank. They started laughing at me instead of wearing it. So I went ahead and equipped it, and of course it was an increase in my overall DPS. So those are basically a quick rundown of, as quick as I could, gosh, I've been talking forever, of stat priorities for the DPS medic. So if you enjoyed my video, there's more to come. This is my first video I've actually ever done. Again, I want to give some shout outs to Guild Umbra, Lord Hammer, the guild leader of Guild Umbra. Thank you for allowing me to be invited into such a great community. I also want to give a shout out to Rised, our chapter lead for WildStar in Guild Umbra. Thank you for the job you're doing. Hope I can help in future with making some more videos. Helping the guild out. Just trying to do anything I can. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it wasn't too boring for you. I will try to make it as painless as possible. And have a good night.